They decided to genetically modify all life on Earth. That was back in 1975. Hi, this is the Celestial Report. Very early in the morning for some of us, and but we have our coffee and we're ready to go. My special guest this morning, and I know it's something that we've been looking forward to for a long time, is David DuByne of Adapt 2030. And I know that many of you came up to me during Branson and said that you followed his work. And so we're teaming up today to answer your questions on the grand solar minimum. And welcome, David.
And 5G also, I know a fair few guys into the 5G awareness over in the UK, and three of them specifically are saying that nothing stops 5G except Earth, like us going into a cave, or wet leaves.
Yes, wet leaves. Yeah.
Wet leaves. Nature is our protector again. When we run to caves or we're surrounded by wet leaves in a forest, we're protected from 5G. It's insane. And then they're cutting down so many trees in the cities to get these lines of sight. Are they truly? All right, the line of sight should not be that much line of sight that they need to deforest an entire city unless they're removing the protectionism devices away from people. Now, again, that might be a little woo-woo, but the amount of trees, they cut down 4 million trees in the UK last year to try to start to install 5G. And that's really what set the catalyst off in the UK was everybody, you went to work in the morning, you're living in these brownstone apartments, 100-year-old trees lining both sides of your street. You come home, it's clear cut.
Yeah.
And this is what really started. Yeah, this is what really started the movement over there, the loss of the trees. The trees are our protectors.
Yeah, it's a scary thought when you think that ancient trees could be cut down for line of sight, for so you can watch Netflix or whatever. You're going to get a faster internet connection or whatever. It's crazy. So
hey, could I throw one more thing on top of there?
Sure.
Now, the same activists that I know that are really heavy into 5G, 5gawareness.com is another one. John Kitson, who runs that one, Sasha Stone, and then Mark Steele. They all know the tech inside this stuff really well. But even in Totnes, where they'd organized, a small town outside of outside of London, about 3 hours on the train, they'd done such good community organization that they had gotten the community council to put a memorandum in that there's going to be no installation of 5G in Totnes or around in the periphery areas inside the city limits at all, even on the hillsides, to be able to get line of sight into some of these things into the city was even forbidden. Like the infrastructure to pump it into the city was forbidden. Every unanimous voting in the city council there. Well, UK was like, and the actual national government was like, no, you don't care what the citizens say. This thing's going in and we're cutting down your trees all around the city. And now that this is where the fight's coming, and they're actually thinking of taking action on destroying the equipment as it comes in. And, the whole town's against it anyway. So they were, trying, and I was asking them a real question, like, if everybody in the town starts breaking anything, and even the police are involved, and nobody tells and nobody reports on anything, can you continue to break it to the point where, they'll just never install it? And then he was like, well, they're going to have to bring troops in to stand next to every single tower that goes in there, because that's the only way that'll be implemented inside. So, even if you think you've lobbied the government to get that tech away from you, the national government's like, no, it's of national interest. We have to put it in, and you have no say. So realize you're pretty much a technocracy serf on this planet when they're putting this 5G tech in. I don't know why they need it in so bad unless it's a control device, because they really, really, really want it in on a timeline of 2023 across the EU. You tell me. That matches up a lot with the things we're talking about tonight. But
so are you familiar with the Asilomar conferences?
I'm not.
Okay, so the first Asilomar conference was in 1975. And a group of high-level scientists and researchers and policymakers got together near Monterey, California. It's a beautiful grounds. I've been there a few times. And they decided to genetically modify all life on Earth. That was back in 1975. Then the second Asilomar conference was in 2010, and I did cover it real time. And that was to geoengineer and to connect that dot, the geoengineering, with the genetic modification of all life. And then in, I think it's 2018, they had the third component, which is, to my understanding, the last component, is artificial intelligence that would run the whole hive system. So that might answer some questions. You might want to look into those three conferences, why they're, let's say, hell bent on getting this whole thing through and what it does to the human body. It was kind of interesting, even back in the day in 1975, not that many people were aware of this whole plan to genetically modify life on Earth, but Rolling Stone magazine had it on their front cover, and they put in big red letters, "You idiots," you know. But nevertheless, it was determined at that time that the people did not have a say, that they knew that they were going to proceed with this rollout of these different things, and that the average person would not have a say. Like, it would not be something that you would vote on. It would not be something that, if it did get to a voting, you just, it would disappear. The bill would disappear. And I've been in plenty of those closed door meetings where actually they're like before dawn, and there's the movers and shakers in the political realm, and basically they make the decision whether the bills move forward or the regulations move forward, or if they're killed. And so really, by the time it gets to a public audience, they've already made the decision. And many of those bills that are for our own benefit are never heard. It's really a shame. And then the few that do make it through, that people are threatened with, bodily harm to themselves. These are our representatives and senators, and they're threatened in many different, and their families, if they can take on that obligation. So a couple more things, as long as we're kind of looking at the big picture, and then we can jump into some solutions, is, so I'll just rattle the three off to get your take on it, and then we can go to some solutions, because these are all part of the landscape, the bigger picture that we all need to look at. So we're not only looking at the grand solar minimum, the increased volcanic and earthquake activity, and the collapse of the magnetosphere and the cosmic rays, but what is your take on the pole shift, the crustal displacement, and a supernova playing a factor in all of this? So that we kind of get, as we go into solutions, we can kind of know what to even look at, what's feasible, what's not, what should be on our radar, what's not, because we can't, at the time that all this stuff really starts intensifying, we're not going to be in research mode, we're going to be in survival mode. So we have to know what dots we need to be watching.
Well, if we have a Charles Hapgood Earth's crustal displacement, that would bring the human population down to less than 10 million people globally. So I don't know how much you could prepare for something like that. A micronova as well from the sun. Now, this is Douglas Vogt's work, and he predicts around 2043 that we'll have one of these events. Again, if we have a micronova from the sun that's sending out 1700 degrees Celsius temperatures, frying, if he was talking about, depends on where the actual particulate matter in that heat would hit on our planet, because through history, they keep finding these black mat layers everywhere. So there would be a different outcome depending on which side of the planet was facing when that energetic particles hit us. If it was on, let's say, over North America, pretty much all the forests would burn off, all the lakes would evaporate, etc. If it was over the Pacific Ocean, you would have a steam event on the term of 8 hours of an ocean evaporating. That would create cloud cover for several hundred years, to the point where not much would survive either. So when you're talking about creating a black mat layer globally, that means everything on a continent incinerated. So the amount of smoke going up there would be something like how many umpteen, massive eruptions could that equate to? That'd be decades of blocked out sun. And, I really go back in the past and I go, how did people even survive that? Because you're talking about dense cloud cover, like nothing is so far off of even what you can imagine as being the thickness of the cloud cover for centuries after a micronova would land over the Pacific Ocean for 8 hours with, let's say, 1,000 degrees Celsius temperature. Water boils at 100. So think about that for 8 hours going nonstop, boiling the ocean off into steam. How much cloud vapor that would release, and then that'll stick up there. Now, how did people even grow anything? And then secondly, if they do have a black mat event where a whole continent gets burned off to ash and all that smoke's in the sky, that is like a nuclear winter kind. Like, how did they even grow anything to survive back then? I'm really mystified that we even sit here and have this conversation because humans survived through all of these things. So keep that in mind going through with this minimal little preparation for a grand solar minimum, that through the most tumultuous events ever recorded in human history, we still survived through this. Is it the ant people that the Hopi talk about that came out and brought us down, and then with 200 later we pop back up where we could actually grow food? I mean, it sounds like there's some validity to some of these ancient myths that the surviving human race was protected and coddled by another race or a species until we could survive back on the surface, and then they brought it back up. This is routinely talked about through all the myths and legends in human history. And it kind of makes sense at the point we're talking about a micronova or a crustal displacement event. But this polar wander is a very real thing. Magnetic pole reversal, our electronics would not be working properly. Most animals wouldn't be able to navigate. Our brains, I'm curious what happens because, it's a species we're set with a polarity as well electrically. And if that were to flip, I wonder what would happen with the human ability to function. And then we step back down here to just a simple grand solar minimum. And in terms of the timeline, the way it's rolled out, this grand solar minimum's first. Magnetic pole reversals or ongoing magnetic wander. I mean, next year it could start to flip back toward the North Pole and everybody will breathe a sigh of relief. We just don't know because we're in uncharted territory. The magnetosphere is weakening to the weakest and uncharted territory that it's been measured in, I don't know, I'm going to say a million years plus. But, when you go back that far, I mean, I understand the science and tech's pretty good, but when they're talking about 700,000 to a million years trying to get something within a 10-year time frame, it's a rounding error when you're talking about 10 years in a million. So can they really be that precise with it when it flipped exactly 700,000 years ago? Perhaps it's been flipping back to the same termination point where it happens so much more frequently than we think. It only went off kilter that one time 700,000 years ago that we measured it and go, oh, it moved and it was a new position of the pole. But maybe it always goes to the same position over Indonesia and flips right back to the North Pole. So unless you lived it, it would appear as if it was always at the same point again, even though it would be routinely flipping. And this is another conjecture of thought that is always happening, happens much more frequently than we think. But the measurement points that we get make it appear that it's only happens very infrequently. So we got this magnetic pole reversal or wander, could be either. And then finally in 2043, we get this Douglas Vogt's research of the micronova from the sun. Look how government's behaving today. They're preparing for something super huge. They are not preparing for something in a very small, a grand solar minimum will be disruptive enough to our societies. But the way I'm seeing governments prepare, like this AI system that we're all talking about and the rollout of 5G, I don't know how much it could really handle of these massive bombardments from nature itself, from the sun and from our universe and from our galaxy. Is it really all that hyper intelligent that if the grid's installed that it can put a frequency wave to actually make something bounce off or become inert in a substance as it comes through? That's another thing to think about too. This AI is making us terraform the planet for it. And if you want to go off into the woo-woo, I firmly believe there's an extra dimensional entity living within the power grid of our Earth that is so hyper intelligent that through these centuries, it's actually gotten us to do the same things that humans are now working for it to install it, to give it a physical location to reside in on this planet. I really think there is some extra dimensional entity living in the copper cabling of our planet and inside all the communication devices that we have for fiber optics. Because it's got to be something hyper intelligent, and everything's pushing to AI and AI and AI, and we keep hearing AI. This thing has got to be so hyper intelligent that it's truly off the scale here. Maybe it did create the hologram that we're living in, but it needs to like put a software upgrade in the hologram we're living in. So I don't know. There's a bunch of ways to take that, but something's weird going on. That all this hyper preparation, all this hyper push to get AI in. So for me, back to the power grid. It makes no sense why they would install this super intelligent AI system if they know the magnetic pole reversal and all these things with cosmic bombardment and possible micronova from the sun or what all is coming. Like, who would ever spend all the money and time to put it in on something that would get broken within a couple decades? This is where I think there's like a disconnect between the information we're truly getting and what something's being planned for that's far nefarious to bring, put more control over the human species as a battery or something. I'll leave it there because I can wander on for days on this subject, which I'm quite into, by the way.
Yeah, me too. I mean, maybe we should do a woo-woo show.
It is a woo. Maybe it's too woo-woo.
No, it's really not too woo-woo. So we really should do a woo-woo show one time. So what do you see for America for the next 10 years? And then let's just really jump into solutions, because that's what everybody wants to know.
Yeah, I think the solutions are you're going to have to be preparing for a split up of the United States, because as we march through these next election cycles and into this food instability parts as we move forward, our country's just not going to operate in the same fashion that it does. It's not going to stay congruous from all 50 states. It's absolutely 0% chance of that. You know, the FEMA's already got a pretty good blueprint of where it's going to break up. They have region 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Like, use that as your blueprint where the new countries are going to form. You know, think about the Caucasus. Think about Czechoslovakia, for example, or, you know, go down into, what was that, Yugoslavia that broke up. And look at all those other countries that formed around what was the former giant bloc of Yugoslavia or Czechoslovakia, and now they broke it up in Slovakia and Czech Republic. You know, like, look at how things broke up after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And it wouldn't surprise me either if China followed something similar, because, you know, living way out west out there for the year that I did out in Chengdu and then over in the east for a couple of years in the cities there, it's completely different culturally. It's completely different climatically. I mean, it's two different countries. When you go way out west near the Himalaya, or you're way over near the Pacific side, I mean, it's just the way they think about life and the terms of control that Beijing had. I mean, they could barely even control that place, and they really didn't control a lot of it during the Cultural Revolution because they were so far removed from Beijing's influence, and then the people out there weren't having it. It's like, you're not coming in and taking our crops. You're not coming in and destroying our monasteries. You're not coming in to erase our history and break my family's heirlooms and antiques. You're not doing it. And they didn't have enough troops to control the entire country. So there's a huge divide in China as well in terms of politics. We got it in the States. I mean, you see it every minute of every day there. So the preparations that you would need would be more in your regional area, like what's available for you in terms of, think about, like you talked about it once, ancient grains. I'm a super fan of sorghum and millet. I eat that quite frequently. And this year, they're 110-year low planting on hard red winter wheat, and guess what? All those extra acres that used to be planted, they're going to swap for sorghum. So, I mean, what's going on here? The amount of planted acres is going to remain the same, but they're switching crops right now, which is another tick the box for me that something's really like upticked in terms of the climate, where our government's trying to stay 1 year ahead or so of the changes, where sorghum might grow next year pretty good, but for sure the hard red winter wheat does no longer have its habitat to grow, and that is very apparent and in your face right now. So what kind of foods grow regionally around your area that you could have access to? Because you got to think the interstate system might be cut off. There might be, you know, checkpoints and all these kind of things, from whatever's coming from California out to, say, New York, or California out to Florida, whatever. There's going to be a break somewhere in the chain, probably, my opinion. But then you're going to have to fend more for yourself. What comes from these other areas across the states that's brought into your local area? My first thing about solutions is local, and then local again. And know everything local about distribution points, the farmers, the manufacturers, the rail lines where the terminus is, the storage facilities. And I actually call people up and talk to them, or go face to face. It's pretty interesting.
It's interesting that you mentioned checkpoints.
It is.
Because one of the things that I've been following for like 2 decades and a lot of people are not aware of, are that the institution of checkpoints into our country that are infiltrating our lifestyle, and maybe people that are listening have run into them, is that invasive species, noxious weeds, and the UN has put out a mandate, and noxious weeds need to be eradicated, and that's part of that burning down process. And the herbicides and the glyphosate, that's all part of that discussion. But they have established, especially for aqua, for boats, a very brisk checkpoint on all the roads. And it doesn't matter what state you live in, all the boats have to be, if you have watercraft, it doesn't matter if it's like a little dinghy or a rubber duck raft or a nice boat, you have to go through these mandatory checkpoints for the invasive species. So that takes us up to yesterday, and I had to go to the city, and it's hunting season right now. Big, huge sign, tons of law enforcement. All hunters must stop at this checkpoint. So, and then we have drug and alcohol checkpoints. So what people don't realize are these checkpoints have been creeping into our culture, our regulations, our laws. There are also checkpoints. There's very strict checkpoints of any interstate conveyance and travel. So there, especially, so if you have blight or if you have mad cow disease or something, then they seal off your state and they don't allow you to transport. But it's funny in that, even though within the state, there's this really tight control and checkpoints that everything has to be inspected. In my FOIA, which is public disclosure requests, I see millions of cattle, diseased cattle, coming across the Canadian-U.S. border to our slaughterhouse and then sold for meat. That ends up in your hamburger. What people don't realize is that your 1 pound of hamburger can include up to 1,000 different animals and from all over the world. So there's no way for you to really even know if your hamburger is safe or not to eat. And so basically you become dependent upon the government because you can't say it's this cow, it's this farm, because they just put it in a big blender, mix it up, and you just really don't know what you're going to get. It's a dangerous time to live. I'm curious. So you're kind of have you been growing have you been growing on a personalized level for some time, or is this a new experience? What are some of the lessons that you've learned as you've gone along?
Yeah, I've been growing for quite a while. My grandparents always had a garden back on their farm way back in the day. So when we go out there for the summers and help repaint the house, they had a quite large farmhouse. So all the cousins would go out there and we'd spend anywhere a couple weeks, 3 weeks, whatever out there. And we would, help paint the house again, go and scrape it, repaint it. But then they always had the garden that we would work in too. They had those huge hedgerows full of all kind of different berry bushes to put the windbreaks out there, and pond on there, stock full of fish. We go fishing every summer, really fun. And again, localized, because everybody knew everybody there. And again, you should do the same thing. Growing your own food, you should know the local nurseries. You should know the people who have the plants. And one thing about the hamburger and the meats, etc., they can include up to 3.5% cellulose as a filler inside meat. But anything else like ice creams and cookies and all this other stuff, they can include anywhere from 18 to 30%. Now, with this, knowing who your local distributor is and knowing who everybody local is, all the way from the plants to the meats and the fish and everything in between, I believe that as food gets much more expensive, they're going to start to use a lot more fillers. And I do believe that legislation will be passed to allow that upper threshold limit of 30% cellulose included in ice creams and all these other pre-ready mix things and cake mixes and all this stuff to be pushed up to 40, 50%. And with that being said, having grown stuff off and on my whole life, for me on a personal level, it helps me grow, and I know exactly what I'm growing. But take it to the next level where there's something I can't grow efficiently, like bok choy. I have, it's hard to grow that one. For some reason, it comes up and the leaves always seem to fall over and it gets too wet. It comes up great in the beginning. When you try to bring it to a nice solid bok choy plant, for some reason you just have difficulty. So I prefer to go buy it, but I don't buy it at a supermarket. I go buy it at the farmer's market here, like the wholesale area where it comes in to distribute to the neighborhood. Straight up, it's in these bamboo, big 50-pound bamboo rounds where they put all the veggies in straight from the farm. So I'm trying to trace back my own supply chain in things. And then the chicken that they sell comes directly from a chicken farmer here that's a local, and you can go out and check out their facility if you want. So there's all these things in the supply chain that you don't know where your food's coming from, but you should. And if you're not doing it by yourself, you should start to learn. Just grow anything. And the regional crops aren't going to grow everywhere either. It's very difficult to grow something like, winter barley down in the Southeast US. It just, for some reason, and again, if you're going to bring a seed from a different continent over, because you think, wow, we might be able to grow cocoa beans down here in Florida or something. It's the intercontinentally swapping seeds doesn't work either. So growing your own food is going to be more about you experimenting with what grows locally in your own zone there. And if we can see and forecast out some of these changes in the climate, perhaps then you could start to prepare for wetter conditions. Maybe some plants thrive in wetter conditions, and then you could start to grow those or learn about it. Or maybe it's going to dry out in your area, but you should already have a good indication. It's just going to amplify from what you've experienced for this last 2 or 3 years. But you are definitely going to need to take more sovereignty and more responsibility over your own food, because Celeste was talking here about interstate commerce being disrupted. I mean, how much vegetable is coming interstate? How much meat is coming interstate? And for us at the end buyer in the supermarket, we're completely removed from the chain. So you don't know what's in your food. But then how many do you really know where your own local farmers would be in? And if enough of you bought a cow together, you could buy your cow and then have somebody else, the butcher, cut it up for you. Say 10 people go in and they go to the local farm, and then they want 10 people buy a whole cow. But then where do you take it? You have a whole cow. You have to know the butcher that will then cut it and then wrap it. And then you got to have the freezer space and all these things. Same with the deer. If you have a deer, you could split it up with people. And we've lost this knowledge of even where our food comes from. Where's your closest goat farm? Where's your closest place you can go get raw milk? Where's the closest place you can go get that dairy and the meat and those vegetables from a farmer? This is where the disconnect is. Most people have no idea in their cities where to go.
Well, there's another factor that I think folks need to consider, and that sometimes with the new techno farming, not even the farmer knows what the product that they have is. For instance, there's hybrid goats, there's hybrid, and I'm not talking a normal hybrid, I'm talking like a spider goat, where they've mixed a goat with a spider genes and come up with these. I'm not kidding.
Get off the wall. Get back off the ceiling.
You know what they make with the milk? They make Kevlar vests. That's what they make with them. It's just a bizarre world, and that we live in. But there's synthetic biology now. And if I went to my nursery, and I do patronize a nursery local, but if I ask, okay, is this what is the history of this plant? They don't know. And so then I can ask them, okay, did you get this plant, and then track it down. One example on a chicken issue is a rancher that was about 5 miles north of me noticed that at 34 days, all of his chickens and turkeys died one year. And he was an old-time rancher. So he did his own necropsy and discovered that it had gangrene. Now that's the year in America that all the turkeys and chickens, what people don't know is every year the commercial market of poultry is tweaked genetically. They genetically alter every year. So the chickens that come out this year are not the chickens that will come out next year. So this is a good reason to, one, buy heritage breeds, but two, to raise your own chickens and for your own eggs and your own replacement stock. But so this lady at the hatchery told him off the record that the it had been tweaked and that all the poultry in the United States was vulnerable to Clostridium botulism.